and welcome to Brainstorm Changemaker series by Tiimo. I have a clapper. Today I have with me Ellie. Ellie is an ADHD and autistic entrepreneur who is a founder of Unmasked, a community of neurodivergent folks. Hi, Ellie.
Hello.
First of all, thank you so much for having us today. Thank you so much for saying yes to this talk. And could you just tell us a little bit about Unmasked and what was the process of founding this community? What did it look like for you?
Yeah, so I guess for me, it was quite soon after getting my ADHD diagnosis first that I started talking online about my experiences. And my audience grew quite quickly. And I feel like the more that it grew, the more people I had messaging me of people saying that they were going through the same thing of a late diagnosis, that they had questions about how to get a diagnosis that they had nowhere to answer, just wanting to have conversations because it was, I guess, something that people don't really talk very openly about or don't always have people in their life, people that they know personally that are going through the same thing. So I was getting loads of different messages from people who wanted someone to speak to about this. And I kind of realized that as my audience grew, I couldn't be that support system to all of those people. I just didn't have the capacity, I guess, to reply to all of those messages. But I could also really empathize with being in that position myself 6 months earlier of having all of these questions and wanting to talk about it and not having anywhere to ask. So it was kind of a thing of like, oh, I want to have this place for all of these people to get these answers, but I can't do that myself. I can't just reply to everyone's messages all day, every day. So it was kind of like, okay, I can't do that individually, but what I can do is put all of these people in a room together and kind of answer the questions in one go and everyone can get the answer at the same time. And also when they're in the room together, they can find other people to answer their questions and they can make other friends that are going through the same process. So I guess it was kind of like a problem solving thing of like, okay, I want me to not have to reply to messages all day, every day. And I want these people to get their answers. So how can we do that? And yeah, I guess that's where it started. So we started off with the online community. And then since then we've had in-person events too, we got to meet some of the Tiimo team there in January. So that was amazing.
So whenever you were running this, sort of prequel to the community, it was just you and you had full control over everything. But now that Unmasked has grown into a community, how do you make sure that everyone is accommodated and how do you guys hold space for each other at Unmasked?
Yeah, I guess it's a kind of tricky one as well because everybody in the team that we work with is neurodivergent. So there's kind of me, Neo and Lewis, who are the main team that are here all the time. And then we also work with obviously different speakers when we have events, different writers for the blog and stuff like that. But everybody that's involved in some way is neurodivergent. So it means that we all have our own ways of working and we all have our own accommodations and our own support needs, which I guess can be quite tricky because I guess, for example, I often have times where I don't want to communicate verbally. I don't want to be on a call. I find calls quite stressful to get the information in sometimes. But then somebody might need to ask a question that can't really be answered as clearly over message. So it's kind of like that combination of, okay, how do we suit everyone's needs but still get the same outcome? I would say a lot of what we do is kind of online and it's asynchronous almost, so it doesn't mean that we have to all be working at the same time. It's kind of stored in Notion or in the Google Drive so people can access it whenever they want to work, which is, I think, really important of, okay, if you don't feel up to it in the morning, go get some fresh air and come back to it in the afternoon. I don't have to be working at the same time as you. So I think that's really helpful. And I think just listening to each other, really. I think this is what so many companies kind of think, that it's so complicated and it's so like specific things and specific policies, where a lot of the time it's just like listen to what someone's telling you. If someone's saying, I don't want to do a call today, okay, we'll find a way around it, or we'll do the call tomorrow. Or if someone's saying that they find it tricky to have the verbal instructions and saying, okay, well, I'll email it to you instead. And just listening to those things one at a time, I guess, is the main thing of, trying to treat each person as an individual and honor their needs separately.
So you've mentioned this amazing capacity for working at different times. Do you have any other lessons or any general golden rules that Unmasked has taught you about running an inclusive community?
Yeah, I think it's tricky of honouring everyone's needs at the same time, because I think it is that sometimes those things are going to clash. Sometimes I'm not going to want to talk to people but my team need me to communicate with them to know what to do, and the community need us to be there to communicate with them, to let them know what's going on and to kind of keep them in the loop. So I think that's the main thing for me. I think one of my natural coping mechanisms is to shut myself off. When things get overwhelming, I'm just going to go into my own little bubble, and I'm just going to kind of focus on me. I don't have the capacity to kind of communicate right now or talk to the people or even let people help me, because that feels like so much effort sometimes. But I think it's kind of like making that effort to like, no, I've got to keep the doors open to my team and to the community and to kind of everything. It feels, I think, vulnerable as well when you're going through like an overwhelmed time. But I would say that like keeping the doors open to other people is a big lesson that I've learned. I think like there's two sides of this one. Like everyone's always going to have an opinion. So it's like sometimes that's tricky because sometimes everyone in the community is like, can we do this event? Can we have this going on? Can we have this channel? Can we do this thing? Which is a bit like, oh, I'm just trying to make it work. Like, please just let me like deal with what I'm doing right now. But then that's also like an amazing thing as well, of everyone's always got an idea and an opinion, and some of those will form the best things that happen. So we kind of did the first big in-person event, which was more of like panel speakers and stuff like that. And then loads of people after the event were like, oh, we'd love to do more social things where we get more time to chat to people as well. And then that's how the smaller hyperfixation stations events were born. And if we hadn't have been open to other people's opinions, we never would have kind of discovered that side of the community. So I think it's, yeah, having that knowledge that everyone's always going to have an opinion and ideas and thoughts, and finding that balance of like, okay, which ones do we kind of keep at arm's length for now because we need to just focus on what we're doing and not get overwhelmed, and how many of those are actually, you know, amazing ideas that we can bring into the way that we're doing things to have a better time for everybody.
So I've been wondering, how do you select projects that you get to collaborate with Unmasked, based on the fact that it is very personal and it is based on this own lived experience? How do you keep it authentic for yourself and for the community?
Yeah, I think it's just always got to be, do I believe in this thing, and do I want to do this thing, and does this feel right to me? Which is, I think, a big whole part of like the unmasking process generally, whether that's the kind of within business or just in your personal life or in the way that you're working or in all of these things. I think it's learning that skill of like, is this right? Does this sit right with me? Does this feel natural? Does this feel good for me? Or am I doing it because I feel like I should do it, or because other people think I should do it, or because I'm trying to people please? Which is, I think, a really hard, there's kind of no way to explain it. It's one of those things that you just have to really take time with yourself and be like, is this a right fit? Which I think is really important when building a community as well, because the more that we make those right decisions right at the start, the more that people trust us going forwards. So if at the start we'd worked on kind of projects with things that weren't really aligned, or we'd worked with brands that weren't actually, you know, inclusive themselves, or they were kind of just doing it as a more performative thing, or if we'd have made those decisions right at the start, although it might have been easier to do because it's, you know, you want to just be doing stuff at the start and get things rolling, that would have meant that our community maybe wouldn't have trusted us in the long run. Whereas now we have like very specific things and we do, and we're, I guess, trying to even streamline what we're doing even more to make it so clear what we're doing. Then it's like, okay, we know that this is something that really, the community are choosing things that really care about the other people in there. Then that's kind of good for going forwards, like the trusting process, I think. So I think it is just that taking that time and that pause and not getting caught up in the, okay, what's next? Like, what's the next big thing? Like, how can we be doing something more exciting? And just being like, does this feel right for us and right for the community? Is, I think, it's that taking that pause is a really important thing to learn.
So we've been having these talks about keeping space for others and keeping the community authentic to the neurodivergent experience. But I'm curious, how do you as a neurodivergent entrepreneur advocate for yourself when working with other partners?
Yeah, I think this is a hard one to learn how to do, especially because I think I sometimes forget how early on I am in my own journey as well. Like, it's still under 2 years since my first diagnosis. So it's still very new to me as well. But I think I sometimes forget that because I've got all of this stuff going on and I'm like, have this audience and running this community, that you forget that, oh no, I'm still like a baby neurodivergent almost. But yeah, I think we're so lucky with Tiimo. Working with a neurodivergent team, I think, is the best thing. in just knowing that you don't have to explain it in any way because you get it. And I think that's sometimes the hardest thing of, it's not the actual advocacy that's the hard bit. It's the wanting to over-explain why, because you don't want anyone to think that you're being lazy or that you're putting it off or that you're unreliable or all of these things. So I think sometimes it's not the actual explaining of, I can't make the call today that's the difficult bit. It's the wanting to say, I can't make the call today because I'm autistic and I don't have the energy to speak right now because I've had loads going on last week, and I really do care about this project, but I just don't have the energy to. And it's like all of that bit that's the tricky bit, because it's the fear of judgment, right? That is the hard bit. So I think for us, we're really lucky that everyone in the team at Tiimo is just on that same. I know that I don't have to do that. I know it's just I don't have capacity right now. And that's fine, which is, I think it's been really good in like teaching me, I guess, especially like my worth with that as well. Because I think until someone gives you that space, you still feel like you have to be the people pleaser, the person that's conforming to the normal way of doing things. You don't want to be the odd one out of the box. And then when someone gives you the permission to be like, no, it's okay to do things your way, and we still like you for doing it that way, it kind of teaches you that, oh, well, I can do that with other brands and companies then as well. But I think it's still definitely something that I'm learning. I think especially when you feel so grateful for the work that you're doing, you don't sometimes want to be the difficult one, because you're like, I feel so grateful to be working with these people and to have this opportunity. And I think especially when I'm doing talks and stuff like that, it almost feels like, anyone else, they just book them and they turn up and they do the talk and it's quite easy for them. Whereas I'm like, I need a quiet space. I need an agenda before. I need the lights not to be too bright. I need, the noise not to be going on too much at the same time. And sometimes I think it's scary and it's uncomfortable to get used to that feeling. But then I think over time you kind of realize, well, I need those things to be able to do the job well. So if it's better for me because I'm not burnt out by the experience and it's accessible to me, but it's better for the company or the brand or the partner too, because then they get the best work out of me as well. But I do again think that it's a slow process of learning to get comfortable with feeling a bit uncomfortable with it. And it's no one kind of wakes up overnight after getting diagnosed of being like, I am advocating for my needs and I know exactly what I need as well. I think that's another one as well, that the more that my unmasking journey goes on, I'm kind of getting more and more layers off over time. So maybe right at the start, it was fine if the instructions weren't that clear, because I wasn't used to having clear instructions from anybody anyway, because I'd never really known that was a thing beforehand. But then as I've learned my needs over time, maybe if it was a company that I'd worked with back then, they might be like, whoa, well, a year ago we did this and it was fine and the short deadline was fine and this was fine. But now that maybe wouldn't be fine for me anymore. And I think that's a tricky thing to get across to people of, my needs are changing over time, and they also change day to day as well. Like I might have some kind of phases where the ADHD is the most prominent side of me of, I want to do all the projects and do all the things and I'm so excited and I'm hyper focusing and I'm getting loads done. And then there might be a couple of weeks later where by doing that I've kind of burnt myself out. So the autistic side is kind of more at the front of, I need space, I can't be around work, I just need to quiet time. And I think that makes it trickier in your head as well, because I think sometimes you feel, or you kind of trick yourself into feeling like you're making it up, because you're like, oh, well, they're going to think that I'm making it up because I could do it last week and I can't do it this week. But I think, again, it's just dipping your toes into the water, I guess, over time of like, no, I can express the way that I'm feeling and I can state my needs. And over time, the more that you do that, the more comfortable it gets, I think.
I think the most profound thing that you've said was that you don't even know what accommodations you could potentially ask for, and that learning process. I can relate to that so much because, working with a brain that is different to everyone around me, it's also super difficult to navigate those boundaries. And once you finally realize that this is an accommodation that you need, it's so difficult to even advocate for it, because it's like, okay, I didn't need it a week ago, and all of a sudden I'm presenting it to all these people. It's like, what are they gonna think? So I think the most profound takeaway from this is that we sometimes don't even know what accommodations could potentially be available to us. So that is so difficult. And on that note, actually, I would love to ask you, what were the biggest barriers working with other partners? Was it maybe what you've just mentioned, not knowing what your accommodations were, or the receptiveness of the other people? I would love to hear how that is for you.
Yeah, I'd say something that I think quite early on I realised that people either get it or they don't. And I think that's a really hard thing to come to terms with, because especially the work that I do, like I am an advocate, I'm an activist, like I want to change people's view and understanding, but sometimes you can't. Sometimes people just aren't going to get it. The more that you could spend all day explaining it to them and they aren't going to understand, which you can kind of understand, because I think there's this whole thing where we're told like to have empathy for other people, where it's like, put yourself in their shoes and how would you feel if it was you? And I think that's really important, but like that's kind of the easy part. If you can understand how they're feeling, then it's easy to be kind towards them. But there's some things that other people are never going to understand about me. They're never going to have a brain that can't physically focus or physically can't do the housework, or they're never going to have a brain that needs to ask 100 clarifying questions to be able to picture what's going on. That's not the way that their brain works. So to them, if you're saying those things, it's like, huh? Like, no, like that doesn't make any sense, because it's not an experience that they've got. And I think, you know, sometimes no matter how hard you try, you can't make someone get it. And I think that was kind of a learning curve for me, of sometimes it's better to walk away than to put more and more energy into trying to make something work, which I think is the case for everybody, right? Whether it's to do with accommodating your needs as a neurodivergent person, or just generally in life, some people aren't the right fit for you. It's whether it's ways of working, whether it's personality, whether it's friendships. And I think having that confidence in yourself, I guess, to think, this isn't working, that's fine. Doesn't mean that I'm a bad person. It doesn't mean that they're a bad person necessarily. It just means that this isn't a right fit. So the best thing that I can do right now is walk away from this. I think that was a hard lesson to learn. But yeah, I think that thing of you can't make everybody understand everything, I think is a tricky one. And also, it's not necessarily your job to. I think that's something. I think I got to a point where I became really frustrated with it, of I'm so tired of every space that I enter. I've got, you know, I'm doing the job that I've been hired to do, whether that's content creator, whether that's speaker. But then I also have this unpaid role of like neurodivergent inclusion manager, because I'm not just turning up and doing the job. I've got to do is there a quiet space? You know, please can I have an agenda ahead of time? Please can you send me all the information? You know, I need my travel details at least a week in advance, because I need to, you know, I like to know what's going on. That's kind of a inclusion manager role in itself. And I think that's something that I have to do at the moment to be able to make spaces accessible for myself. So I think it's learning that that's not on you. I think like now I kind of ask the question of, what are you doing to make this space neuro-inclusive? You know, if it's an in-person event, if it's an online event, if it's, you know, other companies, I've said, you know, have you worked with neurodivergent talent before? And I'm putting it on them almost, because I think it is the natural thing of like, I've got to advocate for myself, I've got to explain all these things, but kind of, yeah, taking a back seat and remembering it's not my job to make everyone understand, and it's not my job to educate every single person. It is to an extent. Like I love that piece of what I do and the public speaking and training companies, but that's the job that they're paying me to do. That doesn't mean that everybody else that I work with and everybody else that I encounter gets that for free. I think is a tricky one to get your head around.
Yeah, I think it's an unfortunate reality that very commonly you meet with a situation where you need to put in all that emotional labor, even though you were not hired or getting paid to do it, which is definitely a very good boundary to set for yourself, to always remember that emotional labor is labor. And even though you are an advocate, you are not always hired to be one. Sometimes you're just hired to be a speaker or a content creator. And on that note, you have been very transparent about your burnout, and I hope you feel comfortable talking about this. But as an autistic person going through burnout, I'm very curious to hear, how did you redefine productivity for yourself in that period? Because that can also be a very tricky one as someone who is so heavily involved in so much wonderful work.
Yeah, I think it's a really tough one. And I think it's also a lot plays into part of it, of like having both the ADHD brain and the autistic brain, because it's like, even if I'm feeling burnt out, the ADHD still wants stimulation and still wants stuff to do, and I can't just lie in bed all day. I don't work like that. But whereas that's probably what I need at the time. I need to do nothing, zero. Like my day needs to consist of sleep, eat, get some sunshine. That's it. That's what like my body needs to recover. But my brain at the same time is like, but I can't just do that. So I think that's how I get myself into these like burnout pools or holes as well, because I have this tendency to need to be busy all the time, which means that because I love the work that I do, I end up just working all the time. And, you know, I live alone, I work online, I work for myself. So there's no kind of boundaries of when I'm not allowed to work. You know, it's not like I can't access the office at nighttime because it's my laptop, it's with me all the time. And sometimes if I've got the choice of, oh, well, I could sit and watch a movie, or I could sit and finish writing this blog about this thing that I'm so excited about, that I love and that I care about, that feels more exciting and enriching, even though it's work. But I think a lot of the time, and because I wanted to like learn to work with myself rather than against myself, I was like, oh, well, if I'm getting bursts of energy to work, then let's go with it. Let's do the work. Thinking that was kind of honouring myself better, because I was like, well, you know, my brain wants to work at 8 p.m, so I'll work at 8 p.m. But I think you have to kind of over time realise that like that's not okay to do. Even if you love the work, it's still work and it's still taking energy. So I think for me, a big changing point has been like, I know that I'm never going to be able to do nothing. So I need to find ways to fill that brain space and that time with something, but with something that is recharging. So whether that's reading, whether that is just spending time listening to music with my Starlight projector on and under my weighted blanket, whether that's going for a walk, whether that's, I just bought myself a guitar because I was like, I want to have a hobby that is, there's no way that I can turn it into work. You know, I want to do something that's going to fill my time that is just for enjoyment. So I think that was a big one for me, of like redefining, yeah, like productivity doesn't have to be working all day. It might be the most productive thing for me to do, to go for a 2-hour walk. And I think it's finding that thing of, yeah, I don't know, I guess just removing yourself from this trap that we've all been taught of you have to be doing something all the time, and your work defines your worth, and you have to be always looking at the next project and doing 100 things, and just sitting with that and being like, why? Why do I have to? You know, it doesn't, like, I'm still have the same value whether I achieve nothing or achieve nothing today, because even if I've achieved nothing work-wise, I've still, you know, maybe I've been for a walk, maybe I've made a new meal, maybe I've actually managed to eat 3 meals in a day, which is kind of achieving something in itself. And yeah, I think it is just, I think it took me a really long time, and I think a lot of therapy to realise it. I was speaking to somebody yesterday about it. I think at the start, when I first, because I felt so grateful to kind of come into this world and start doing this work, I was like, had all of these goals where I was like, I want to be on TV, I want to work with this brand, I want to write a book, I want to start a podcast, I want to do all of these things. But then I was simultaneously having conversations with my therapist of being like, I'm so burnt out, I can't deal with this work, I'm so tired, like it's so overwhelming. And it was kind of having that disconnect and sitting down and being like, hang on, if I'm burnt out already now, why do I want all of these extra things that are going to make me more and more burnt out? And I think it was kind of realizing that instead of, you know, those goals, they sound really exciting and they would be amazing things to do. But do I want the life that comes with those things? Probably not. Do I want to be getting on the train to London every week? No, because it is a lot of energy for me. Do I want to be in busy TV studios where the lights are really bright and I've got to make small talk with people and I've got to wear outfits that don't feel comfortable for me, and I'm working, I'm not getting home till 9 p.m. and I'm just eating something and going to sleep and I can't speak on a weekend because I've been so busy through the week? I don't want to feel like that. So I think a lot of the time we start with the goals and then we just feel like we have to deal with the life that comes with those goals, whereas it's kind of reframing that for me of like, okay, what life do I want? I want to have time with my friends. I want to, especially in summer, I want to have time to get out in the sunshine. I want to read. I want to feel rested and relaxed. I want to feel happy. And then being like, what goals can I fit into that life, rather than kind of starting with the goals and dealing with the life that comes with it, which is, I think, a really strange thing to do because it's the opposite of what we've been taught. At school, it's not, do you want to be happy when you grow up? It's what job do you want, and do you want to be successful, and do you want to achieve things? And I think it's just not the way for, especially for neurodivergent people, that's not sustainable for us. And I think that's a key word to like keep in mind as well, of like, it's not sustainable to keep working. If I'm forcing myself to do stuff when I'm burnt out, then that's what happens in 5 years. I'm going to be too ill to do anything ever if I keep burning myself out. So it's better for me to do smaller amounts, but I can keep doing the work that I'm doing for 10 years or for 20 years or for the rest of my career, rather than doing all of the work in the next 1 or 2 years and then getting myself to a state where I'm hospitalized or I'm just too tired to do anything. So thinking about the longevity of the amount of energy that you're putting out as well, I think.
I've been wondering, how do you connect with other neurodivergent communities outside of Unmasked? How do you find these spaces and how do you navigate them?
I think online has been a massive part of that. And I think I'm very grateful for the online neurodivergent community, because I know that if it wasn't for those other creators sharing their experiences, I probably wouldn't have got my diagnosis or come to my own realization myself. I think when I first kind of discovered that I might be autistic or might have ADHD, they were kind of like passing comments from a therapist of, has it ever been looked into and this thing. And then when I spoke to my GP or to someone from the psychiatry side of things, they were like, maybe, but I think you're kind of being a bit of a perfectionist and maybe a lot of the things don't relate to you. And when I was reading the kind of official stuff myself, a lot of it didn't really, it was kind of like, oh, maybe, it was like, I think a good example of the kind of things is like, one of the main questions on the autism pre-screening is like, do you collect information about categories of things? For example, birds, trains, cars, and planes. And for me, it was like, no, not really. I've never really been into things like that. And then kind of seeing other, female or assigned female at birth content creators, or even just people in their 20s that aren't children, right, sharing their experiences of like, oh, this is the way that shows up for me. My special interest is music, or my special interest is whatever hobby it might be, and I get really hooked on particular artists or films or series or content creators. And then it was like, oh, I do that. Like I don't collect information about birds, cars or trains, but I do obsess over bands, and I'll listen to the same band 100 times, and I'll go to 10 of their concerts, and I'll know every single song, and I'll know everything about their lives. And, I think that translation of how things show up, because the diagnostic criteria is still so aimed at young white cis boys, that translation of, oh, that is actually, I do experience that, but I just experience that in a different way because I'm a 20-something-year-old woman, not an 8-year-old boy. Like, if I hadn't have had that, I don't think I would ever have realised myself that I did actually have those experiences, because it was a bit like, it kind of fits, but not 100%. But then those translations were what helped me realize myself. So I think, I'm really grateful for the online communities. And I think what's really important is kind of a combination of the two of those things. So for me, it was really important to seek out other people with similar lived experience to me. So people of a similar age to me, people who are femme, or like women and people marginalized for their genders, and people who have the same hobbies as me, and people who just people that are similar to me, I think was really important in that validation and that understanding of how it might show up for me. But then I think especially now it's really important that I find people with different lived experience to me, so that I can advocate for the whole community, or as many people in that community as possible. Because I think something that I'm really aware of is that although, you know, the system did let me down, it is, you know, bad that I didn't get diagnosed till my mid-20s. There are so many people that are so much more let down by the same system. You know, people of colour are still not getting diagnosed. Trans people are having a really hard time and often can't get a diagnosis because it'll affect their access to gender affirming medical care, and and there's people kind of that can't advocate for themselves in the same way that I can. The people with higher support needs or learning difficulties, or those that are non-speaking or non-verbal. And I think that's something that I'm really conscious of right now, of making sure that I know that I'm in a really privileged position to do the work that I do, because I'm still like quite like palatable to other people, so they're able to listen to what I have to say more. One, because I have the capacity to be able to say what I need to say, and two, because I'm not that difficult for them to deal with, because I'm quite similar to what they used to. I'm very high masking, like I can get myself through social situations, but I don't want me to become the face of, you know, this is what an autistic person looks like, because that's not true. It's such a diverse spectrum of people with all neurodivergences. So I think it's important that, you know, I need to listen to those people myself to understand their experiences and how I can advocate for that, but also like encourage people of being like, okay, it's great that you've started listening to what I have to say, but that's not enough. You need to then carry on and listen to these other folks as well. So I think that's kind of just a case of like actively searching out those voices. And I do think that the neurodivergent community are good at raising one another's voices generally. I think it's something that we're all aware of, that there are so many voices other than maybe the most prominent ones that need to be listened to and heard. So I think it's just a case of, I think online is the main one, and just kind of taking that time to raise the voices of those that are multiply marginalized, as well as, you know, those of us that have similar experiences to us as well. I think that's something that is a big focus for Unmasked at the moment, because I think, you know, I do a lot of work obviously, and kind of Ellie Middleton is a person, but I don't want Unmasked to just become another Ellie Middleton show. I want it to be representative of the whole community and of all different people's lived experiences. So, for example, like this month for Pride, where kind of we've worked with 10 different queer neurodivergent people to share their stories. And I think that's something that I want to continue throughout the year, of working with kind of centering different people's lived experience throughout that. And I guess that's just a case of people knowing people, right? And listening to that and thinking, oh, okay, I've not come across that person's work before, but I think it deserves a space to be heard and to be raised. So let's be that space for them, and let's give them the space to do that, and let's amplify that. So I think it's something that is definitely one of my main things, I think, at the moment, of like, how do we make sure that Unmasked isn't just me shouting about my experience, or us shouting about our experiences as high masking, lower support needs folks. How do we make sure that we're amplifying the voices of the whole spectrum, I guess?
So speaking of the neurodivergent community, I'm really curious to hear if there are any role models that you follow.
Yeah, I think so many of the people that I like followed and learned from their content and loved their content when I was going through my own journey, like I'm so lucky that they've become friends now, which is such a nice thing. And I think it's like that combination about, I will always be so grateful to them for their content of giving me this answer that has changed my whole life. But then I now get to be grateful for them as a person personally, as well as just for their content. So I would say Ella Willis is an absolutely amazing content creator. I feel like their output always astounds me as well, that they've always got something to share about what's going on, whereas I think I am very like peaks and troughs of, I'll share loads of stuff and then I'll have quiet times, whereas that there's always something. Every time I check Ella's page, they have shared something that I'm like, oh my God, like I do that. I experience that. I can relate to that. Millie Evans is another wonderful creator who is now one of my greatest friends. They are a sex educator as well. So I think that's super important, of raising other conversations as well as sharing the fact that they're neurodivergent. I love working with Pathivara. They were one of our speakers at our Unmasked panel event. And they kind of talk about, again, the intersection of neurodivergence, but also of being Black and also of being queer as well. So there's that whole kind of intersecting identity that they have and that they share so openly, and I think they're great, and just so many others. I think it's so hard, like I can go on for lists forever and ever of people that I love their work, but I think that's a main thing for me this year, of how can I center those voices in the work that I'm doing as well. And hopefully there's another exciting project that's coming soon that I might mention here, and I think it'll be okay, because by the time it's edited it'll be fine. So I've also written my book, which is going to be coming out soon, and I was really lucky to get to include some of those voices in there as well, which is really nice for me to, I think I'm so grateful that I have that space to explore the conversation myself, but it was really nice for me to have a physical thing that I could share other people's stories and experiences in as well. I think that's a big focus for me at the moment. I think it kind of works in both ways as well, because it's obviously beneficial for everybody that other voices are raised, but it also then helps me, because it's not, I've got to be making 10 videos every week and making 10 posts, because it's, it saves my energy if I'm amplifying other voices. It means that I can take a step back and I can just be putting out one experience a week, and then the rest of them can be other people's experiences. So I think it's a win-win, and I get to preserve my energy and work in a more sustainable way, like we've spoken about. But I also then get to ensure that other people's voices are raised and that the community get a wider kind of education as to a wider range of experiences. So I think it's a win-win situation.
So what is the journey for Unmasked for the next year?
So I think at the moment I'm definitely going through a phase of, how do I make this sustainable? I think that's another thing as well, that it's because we care so much about the work that we do. I want to do more events, and I want people to meet more people, and I want to do all this stuff, but also I have to remember that I am a neurodivergent person, that, the community that I'm trying to help, it's no point in helping those if I'm burning myself out in the honor of doing that. So I think a big thing for me is finding a way to, how can we make this more sustainable, which I think a big part of that is raising other voices and making it more of a community collective, because as of now it is a community, but it is more of like the community and the team, whereas it's like, how can we make it that the community have more ownership of what's going on, and they can organize their own events and they can put out their own content. So I think that kind of sharing the mic is a really big part of what I want to do with it. And obviously the book, I think I'd love to do in-person events tied in with that coming out, to open up the conversation more, and have panel events with the different people that I've included quotes from, and just give people a space to really talk about that, rather than it just being okay, you can buy the book, you can read it at home on your own, and that's it. I don't want that to be the case. I want to make spaces where we can, you might have read something that's then inspired something from your story, so that can be shared, and we can all talk about those experiences together and create more space for talking. I'd say is a big one as well, and just finding ways to connect. I think connection is the main thing. I think at the start we wanted to provide loads of resources and do loads of kind of exciting and complicated events, which all of those things have a space, but I think the main reason that anyone joins the community is for the community, for the connection. They want to meet people, they want to feel seen and heard, they want to find like-minded people. So remembering that is what we want to help people do, and it doesn't have to be so complicated all the time. It can just be a coffee morning. It doesn't have to be a fancy workshop and talks and all this stuff. It could be, it's as simple as a chat, or as simple as an online space where people can drop in a virtual session and all of that stuff. So I think, putting like sustainability for the community and for myself, and working out how do we make this work in a way that isn't draining us, how do we raise a wider range of voices, and how do we keep it simple and just put connection at the forefront of everything that we're doing.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful, beautiful takeaway from this, that change can come in all shapes and sizes, and it doesn't have to be grand, and it doesn't have to come through these very elaborate events, but it can be just as simple as a conversation with someone.
Yeah, I think it is so nice to have these just like real conversations. I think so much of like the work that I do, especially like going into companies and stuff, it does feel like sometimes I've stopped masking as a neurotypical person, but then I start masking as like, hi, I'm Ellie, neurodiversity in the workplace expert. And it becomes like, it's important work to train companies, but it's still not like me. Whereas I think stuff like this is so nice to do, of just like, I'm a human. I'm not this girl boss like machine. I think is so nice to get the chance to have these conversations. I think they're so important for people to hear as well. I think that's another thing that we forget of, like, you think that everything that goes out has to be like a perfected like conversation, or it's like this perfectly edited video, and it's like, actually, when you're just chatting as two humans, people are probably going to take more than that, because it's something that they will relate to and something that they can experience, rather than this whole like fancy thing. I think it's such a nice space to get to do that.
Yeah, it's amazing to get to be a little bit authentic once in a while, and I'm so happy that we got to have this little space to be authentic and talk about this. And I'm glad you didn't feel the pressure of all these questions and the whole setup. So I'm super happy how it turned out. And again, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so nice to chat.
That was the first episode of Changemaker series. If you would like to give us some feedback or suggest a new guest, you can find us on Instagram at Tiimo app. We'll be waiting in the DMs. But in case you would like to send us an email, you can find us at hello@tiimo.dk. And if you would like to check out more of Ellie's stuff, you can find her at Ellie Mids or at We Are Unmasked, both on TikTok and Instagram. And thank you so much for tuning in today, and until next time.